Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee Shop Philosophy. As always, I'm your host, Killian Hobbs, managing editor for think-liberty.com and the news editor for beinglibertarian.com and the subsidiary publications. As always, you can follow us on all forms of social media, including you can follow me directly at Killian Hobbs-author on Facebook there. I haven't bothered with the other social media feeds just yet, but I do have a page set up there for people who do want to contact me directly. Again, you can go to our website, hit the little subscribe bell for all of the daily notifications on all the articles we have coming out. And, of course, you can check back with the Think Liberty Podcast Network weekly to get updates on all of the other shows that we have going on. There's other things I could list here, but, well, hopefully this isn't the first episode you're tuning in on, in which case you've been able to hear all of the stuff I've said every other time. Moving right into the episode. Today I'm joined by Jody Marie. Jody, say hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Reason I have Jody on today is we were discussing psychology, behavioral development. We were discussing the impact that these things have into people's lives and a lot of the changes that we can see in society because of these elements in play. Now, Jody, here, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have, I think it was, you said 11 or 12 years background in this?
It's about 11 and a half years background in mental health with a focus on behavior modification with kids ages 3 to 18.
Okay, perfect. I guess what I'll start off with here, I'll jump right into some of the questions here. Unless you want to introduce yourself a bit better. You're the first guest I've had on the show, and I'm terrible at introductions both in real life and apparently on my own podcast as well. So if there's more you wanted to say about yourself.
Not really. Just I am who I am, and I have a bachelor's in education. I started out as a teacher. I got a master's in psychology. And now I'm doing neither, but, you know.
Life changes around. I originally thought I was going to get into politics until I realized they were all bastards. So here we are. Now I'm a guy that sits around at like
2020.
Oh, God, I can't wait for all the hindsight 2020 jokes next year. For the like terrible punster in me, I'm going to be sitting there at 11:59 New Year's this year, and I'm just going to get ready just to be the first person to make that joke in our time zone.
Oh, I can't wait.
I got to be on that like white on rice. Like, it's got to happen.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll move into things a little bit here. So you were saying before you did work with kids between the ages of 3 and 18, and it was with behavioral controls and things like that. So one of the things I wanted to ask was, what are some of the key issues, I guess you could say, that you ran into that required behavioral modification?
Well, I worked a lot with, like in schools with kids that weren't able to sit and pay attention to the teacher, or if they were disruptive. A lot of ADHD kids or ODD, oppositional defiance. I also worked with kids on the autism spectrum that their behavior is just trying to, I guess, mold them into what the society thinks appropriate behaviors or the appropriate people that they should be.
So with that, because you stress the word appropriate there, what kind of guidelines did you have for what appropriate is?
Oh boy. Well, I guess just when I was in a school, I worked off based off what the teacher would want or what the school curriculum would want or what the administration would want. Interesting enough, I found out that this whole Common Core thing also has a part of it that talks about being model citizens. So there are actually objectives within the Common Core system that talk about, that those appropriate behaviors that kids are supposed to have.
Yes, the appropriate behavior the appropriate behavior. That's great English right there. Oh boy, this has been a great night for the people that are listening, and usually this comes out like flawlessly or at least close to flawlessly, and it sounds great. We've been going back and forth for like 45 minutes trying to fix a small, tiny detail in my audio settings to actually make the guest thing work. For some reason beyond me, it was only recording one of the two of us. It wasn't working for both for I want to say like 45 minutes until I figured it out. But that's neither here nor there. Well, that's not what we're discussing today. So when it comes to this kind of setup in the Common Core that you mentioned there, I find that really fascinating because the idea that they're implanting this idea of having to follow the state or follow the rules of society in a specific way in order to be deemed acceptable. It touches on something that I've always considered to be one of the least talked about, but probably one of the most damaging aspects of the way that the government shapes society. And this goes really heavily into the behavioral modification, which is the concept of social engineering. Now, when you were working in the education system there, was there anything that you would say stuck out as an aspect of social engineering in that sense?
Well, if you think about it, a lot of it, like kids nowadays, whenever they're in school, they're expected to sit, they're expected to follow the administration or their, like I want to say dictator, but it's not dictator, but it kind of is. The dictator of the school, which would be the principal, right?
Yeah.
Basically, they want kids to do what they're told and be these good little beings that sit and listen and follow the rules exactly how they're given to them. There's no questioning the rules. There's, you see you're working with Johnny and he's acting up. One thing that we were always told was, oh, look how little Mary is sitting well, and you should be doing that too. So it's really, the more I thought about it within this past week since we have discussed it, the more I realized that like I was actually helping to like control these kids and like do the social engineering aspect of it, and I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, it's always surprising when you look back on a couple of things before you, I guess, have that epiphany of how much the state really seeps into people's lives and the way that we approach things with all these little indoctrinated ideas that we don't even think about. It's just something that we kind of do until we sit there and it kind of hits us in the face a little bit. Now, I'm sure that, at least I hope there's parents listening out there.
Well, even if they are single people, someday maybe they're going to be parents and they're going to need this information.
Oh, of course. But what I was going to ask was, where would you say there's a line drawn between like a social engineering thing, like in the negative sense that we're discussing it right now, where, certain ideas are being indoctrinated into the children versus just old fashioned discipline?
Well, I think it's really when is like not questioning authority. Yes, there's an appropriate way to act in public, or an acceptable way, I guess. You don't want kids to be raised as feral, wild animals, but you also want them to be able to question the authority. You want them to say, hey, I don't agree with this. So can you explain it more to me, or can we discuss the rule or whatever it is and maybe, get me to understand it a little bit better or understand why I need to follow this rule other than just sit down in your desk and do what you're told.
Yeah, that bit of curiosity, that bit of adventure that I've noticed that a lot of people in like I'm going to say the 20s range, or even the Generation Z, they're calling them now. Even the Generation Z kids, they just don't have that kind of sense to them. Like it's it's a much smaller group that actually takes that breakaway and says, no, I'm going to question everything, and not just that surface rebellion question everything, but actually I'm going to sit down and get to an answer, question everything.
Right.
And it's through that we see a lot of innovations in society. It's you need that attitude to have another Renaissance. You're not going to have that kind of cultural growth or societal growth if we're drilling that out of the youth of the day. One question I'd have as well, because again, one thing, some of the audience might know this. I can't remember if I've mentioned this on a previous podcast or not, or it may be in my writing, or if people actually read that. I'm hoping people read that, but I always assume not, just in case. I was actually homeschooled. So the way that it worked up here is that we had to get all the documentation from the Ministry of Education, so basically the state education department for Ontario, which is right. Ontario is a province, which is kind of like your states, but a little different. I'm not getting into it all, but anyway, moving on.
I know a little bit about Canada.
Yeah, we're not all maple syrup, and we don't live in igloos. Well, some of us do, but that's beside the point. We don't talk about them; they make us look bad. Anyway, the way we had to do it was get all the information from the curriculum, so follow the guidelines that were set forth by the government, and be able to prove that all of the work that's included there had been followed, filled out, and everything had been done up to the standards of the Ministry of Education. Because of that, I'm a little out of touch with the way that standard education systems work. I mean, I know it from some of the work that I did with at-risk youth back when I did a lot of volunteering before, but obviously not as much as someone who's actually worked in the field or worked in the industry, or even just people who actually were raised in it and went through all 12 or 13 grades of standard state education. So one of the things I've always been curious with is, since you've done that for, the 11 years that you did, and you've worked with such a large age range, what would you say is the age where you kind of see it impact them the most? But what I mean by that, I'll clarify a little bit here. When I say impact them the most, I mean, when they're, 5, 6, 7, or 8 years old, then there's that sense of just, okay, the teacher's the authority. I'm going to listen to the teacher. I'm going to do what they say. Or in the case of, say, more troubled students or students with learning disabilities or whatever else, then there's the extra coaching that goes along to get them to follow those instructions. But what would you say is the age that it kind of becomes, I guess, automatic? Like the age range where they've kind of just given into that system that they've been indoctrinated in through the years that they've been in the system?
Well, that's interesting, because I was listening to a podcast on the way home from work tonight on social engineering. They had mentioned, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they had mentioned how it is important to begin indoctrination before the age of 10 for it really to set in with kids. I think they're probably right with that, because earlier than that, you still have that kind of youngster type, like you said, following the teacher, following the authority, what I should do, what I'm supposed to do. And if they don't get that, then before the age of 10, I think once like the puberty hits, or once the hormones start moving and the kids really just kind of want to develop their own sense of self, then that's when, if it hasn't been drilled into them by that point, it's probably not going to be. And those are going to be the kids that are going to, I think, question everything, if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. I was figuring that it would be about, it'd be pre-puberty, it would be adolescence kind of age range. The thing I find really interesting when we talk about social engineering, though, is when you think of the same techniques that they still use on adults. I mean, even when you look at basic, what we call the Mickey Mouse laws that they have, like the small speeding laws and stuff like that, almost all of it takes that kind of basic human psychology into account in order to change the way that we behave. I mean, one of the more prominent examples of that in recent days would obviously be the carbon taxing and stuff like that, with the idea that it's going to change how we behave, with how we consume things, with how we do all that sort of stuff, even though by and large it'll probably be ineffectual. But I mean, I was reading something the other day about civil engineering and the way that they choose the speed limits. A little fascinating thing, a little side note here, but they know you're going to speed. In fact, they usually account for, in Canada, they account for about 5 to 10 kilometers over. So in the US, that'd be equivalent of about 3 to 5 miles over the speed limit. They account for the fact that you're going to do that. They know that it's going to be a thing. So they actually set the speed limits lower so that you still go the speed they want you to. Like,
I find that funny because I travel the interstate every day for work. It's about a 25 to 30 mile drive straight down the interstate, and the speed limit is 70. I set my cruise control for between 73 and 75. So I guess I'm following that rule.
Yeah, it's hilarious. That I'll try to find the article at some point, hopefully before this gets published, so I can include it in the links there. If I can't, I apologize, but by all means, look it up. They actually, when they're setting up the roads, the speed limits, everything like that, it's less physical engineering on how roadways and ramps and everything are going to work, and almost all of it's trying to account for how we're going to use it. It's like a funny one. On the roadways, the part where you're supposed to merge at the end, where a lane comes to an end and you have to merge off, you're actually supposed to let the cars go all the way to the end and then go over. I'm sure everyone that's ever driven down any road and has seen that one guy that zipped past everybody and then tried to come in, they've just thought that person's an asshole. But they're actually following the way the roads are supposed to be designed.
Yeah, you're supposed to zipper merge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it's designed. And everybody thinks the person at the end is an asshole for some reason.
Well, because they got 2 or 3 or 10 car lengths ahead of them. That's why they're the asshole. But no, I understand what you're saying completely.
Yeah. They're willing to go and follow that side route or that side lane to go all the way down and go over, when really every lane is supposed to be filled. That way it alleviates overall traffic.
Right.
But instead, we all move over early, and that actually creates more congestion because it reduces the amount of road that's filled with cars. So that's when a lot of the road widening projects, or that one famous picture where they created a massive swooping loop to account for traffic, and everyone says that it's terrible engineering when really it was designed to actually move the cars around because we drive like idiots. So that the roadway thing is just one example, but what would you say is another prominent example of stuff that's kind of drilled into people during those formative educational years that you see people almost unconsciously following into their adulthood?
Well, I would go with the whole questioning authority thing. For one, definitely, it starts with your teachers. Well, it should start with your parents, but you question your parents, whatever. But following what your parents want you to do. But then I think, sorry, my cats are being dicks. They're like playing in a garbage bag right now. I think it ramps up more when the kid gets into school and you have this authority figure. You have different authority figure every year. You have your principal, and they want you to do certain things. And then, of course, they always have the cops are your friends. They'll do anything to help you, which I'm not saying all cops are bad. They're not, but
no,
you know where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I'm not used to the guest thing.
No, it's cool. It's cool. When you were talking about like traffic, I find it interesting. Like if you go into a high school, traffic in the hallway moves just like traffic on the roadway. You walk on the right side of the road. You're at the right side of the hallway going to your class. And, just like you drive on the right side, unless you're in England or one of those other countries that doesn't, whatever.
England doesn't count.
Well, I mean, and I think things that a lot of it just becomes common every day. It's not all bad, I guess, is where what I'm trying to get out. Like you learn the proper way to respond to somebody or the proper way to respond to a threat or whatever, and that all carries over into your outside life too, adulthood or whatever. Um, the quote unquote proper way to deal with things.
Yeah, there's a lot of good skills to learn there too. I mean, one thing I want to stress to any of the listeners out there is that we're not just bashing every form of indoctrination there is. There's a lot of key social ideas that people do need to learn, such as not immediately flying off the handle and getting violent every time someone says no to you, or not, trying to rob, kill, steal just because you can. There's a lot of social cues and base concepts that make this whole society thing work that, yeah, we do need to teach that, and we do need to instill that into youth at a young age and get them used to the ideas that no, we are not animals. But at the same time, the kind of thing we're focusing on is when the state comes in and tries to decide what society is supposed to look like, abusing their power as the educational institutions, or just through their continuous public messaging, or the way that they design the road and road laws, or any of the other million little things they do to change the way that you behave and change the way that you and your kids and society at large are going to interact with each other and develop. And it really has to raise some questions, the kind of power that's in that aspect of what the state can do. I think that, we all focus on people going to jail over drugs, or the military industrial complex, or taxation and theft, and all of the other kind of, I guess you could say, taglines that you see in libertarian discussion. But it had always shocked me how little attention the concept of state social engineering really gets, especially considering it's probably the most insidious aspect of the way that they invade people's lives. So I guess one big question I want to ask, because I think this is going to be a sizable chunk of our discussion here. What would you say, having seen these mechanisms firsthand when it comes to changing behavior, what would you say are the best steps to unlearning some of this type of indoctrination or programming?
I would say probably recognizing it first. I have to admit, I was not always a libertarian. I didn't always think this way. My boyfriend used to rant and rave about how all these ideas are drilled into our heads and we shouldn't believe everything. And I'd always go, like herdy-der or whatever. And then the more I started listening to him, the more it started making sense. I always thought like certain things I didn't think they were bad, but I was against them because quote unquote illegal. And he'd always bring that up to me, and it's like, oh well, yeah, you're right, But I think getting to the point where you can recognize the fact that this has been done, and then making the conscious decision that you want to change your way of thinking. And it doesn't happen overnight, definitely. I believe I once read like 21 days to change a habit or something like that. So you start catching yourself, thinking in the way that your thought processes, and you need to challenge those thoughts, just like you would do with anything else. We always discuss in mental health about if you're having negative thoughts, or if you're having depression thoughts, or things like that, then you want to. My cat is falling. Oh my God! I think you.
Your cat needs behavioral correction.
My cat does need behavioral correction, and that was the funniest thing. I wish I had that on video. Um, where was I at?
You were saying that
Okay,
one of the first things is,
yeah,
recognizing there. Yeah.
recognizing the thought and challenging that thought into yourself. Like I said, like if you're having depressive thought, oh, I'm such a terrible person. Okay, you know what? I just had that thought, and now I'm not really a terrible person. So you want to challenge it within yourself. Um, and then I think like once you start challenging it, then that's when once your cognitive once your cognitive structure changes, then that's when the whole behavioral will follow. Um, you're taught it's not appropriate to act in this way. Well, as an adult, I might stop and think, okay, I was always taught it's not appropriate to behave this way, but why not? Like I see other people doing it, and I'm not just saying follow the crowd, but
Yeah, the old nonconformist crowd where everyone who's a nonconformist looks the same.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you don't want that.
But like, oh, I was always taught that it was inappropriate to use foul language out in public or whatever. And then, well, shit, everybody's doing it now. And it's kind of funny because I've taught my kids who are 8 and 13 that the swear words are just like they're adjectives. They're a part of our language at this point. It's just they don't mean anything unless you put meaning behind them. So in that sense, it's kind of like I'm already changing at least some people's thoughts on, the appropriateness of behavior or whatever. But and I get a lot of flack for it. If my 8-year-old swears, it's like the end of the world. But
as a former 8-year-old, 8-year-olds have completely just dirty mouths. Like anyone in that age group from like 8 to like 13, 14, they know every single swear word and they use them constantly around their friends solely just to practice using these words. Because like 8-year-olds feel like they're adult when they call someone a fucker or tell them to blow me or whatever else. Like kids feel like king shit when they start using this language because that's the grown-up secret code language or whatever. Like it's just something in kids that they love getting away with doing that. So they all talk shit amongst their friends. It's hilarious.
I would have to agree with that, except for my daughter, who she has, even though I allow her to use swear words, whatever, she has only used them 2 times in front of me. And her friends, up until I would say 2 years ago, told me that she would not swear. And then I caught her on Snapchat and I was like, I showed it to her. I'm like, listen, if you can write it, you can say it. And she's like, no, I can't do it. I'm like, oh, for God's sake.
Getting bashful around words.
Like I would get in her face and be like, say fuck. Just say fuck. And she'd be like, no, I can't do it. I'm like, it's 4 letters, say fuck.
That is like the complete 180 of every like other parent's relation to talking about swearing to their kids. I love it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been calling my daughter, like, I call her my little bitch. I've always called her my little bitch. And like, she had a friend over one time. We were getting ready to go somewhere. I walk in the living room. I'm like, all right, bitches, let's go. And the friend looked at me like, what just happened? And I was like, and I tell my daughter, I'm like, I'm the only one that's allowed to call you a bitch. Like, don't ever let anybody else say it.
Yeah.
But, and my son, some of the YouTube videos he watches, oh my God. And he thinks it's hilarious.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, ugh, ew, I don't know. Anyway, I'm on a rant. But so recognizing, accepting, and challenging those thoughts, and then your behavior will follow.
Love it. One last thing I'll ask here. Now, obviously, nothing's going to match having actually done it for like 11 and a half years and having the educational background in it. But if people are looking to learn more about this side or more about the importance of behavioral correction or that kind of side of cognition, what would you say is probably the best resource for people to look for?
I used a lot of, it's a program called DBT, Dialectical Behavior Therapy. It's used, it was developed primarily for people with borderline personality disorder, but it can be applied to just about anything. And there's a lot of skills, um, being non-judgmental, being mindful, and all of that. And it kind of all follows, it starts the ball rolling. There's a website, DBT Self Help. I don't know. I don't remember if it's a .com or a .org or what it is, but it's a good resource that I used to use. I have a lot of workbooks that, I mean, you can really just find the information on the internet with the wonderful technology that we have today. But yeah, if just look up DBT or dialectical behavior therapy, you can find a lot of good information. It was developed by Marsha Linehan, and after she had developed it to use with borderline patients, there was an article that came out that she actually is diagnosed with borderline personality herself. They are skills that she was actually using on herself to help her cope with everything. And then she published it, and now everybody gets to use it. But it's really good. It's very interesting.
Definitely something for everyone to look in for. That actually sounds very interesting stuff. I'll have to look into that myself. I always love learning more about that stuff whenever I can.
It applies to literally just about anything in your life. I mean, if you're thinking about being more mindful in your daily life, which is just basically paying attention to the one thing that you're doing instead of being in the car and driving 40 miles and going, how did I get here? It's more about paying attention to your surroundings and what's going on in the moment rather than what's to come or what has happened in the past. It's very interesting.
Especially because the way that kind of cross ties back over to the Buddhist mentality of present moment awareness. It's actually really interesting
correct.
how that stuff kind of always ends up blending into each other.
Right.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap everything up here. Jody, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being the first guest on the podcast here. Is there anything else you wanted to say to the audience there?
Not really. Not that I can think of offhand. Although, no, I do want to add this.
Sure.
You're talking about the government and how they utilize social engineering and things like that. And I know a lot of people, when I go down this route, a lot of people kind of roll their eyes at me, but I always compare it to, Nazi Germany, where Hitler and his guys convinced people that what he was doing was the right thing. And it even went down to as far as, they told the Jewish people that they were going into these buildings for showers when they were really going into a gas chamber, but they believed it because, you're supposed to believe the government. And I think it all kind of goes down to that. So just something to keep in mind and roll your eyes at me when I say it.
No, that's a great example there as well. A lot of people forget the power of propaganda. Even nowadays, it still has the same strength for the impression that it leaves on people. Even if they think the specific piece of propaganda is obviously propaganda, the idea still just kind of sits there in the mind.
Right. Well, and they didn't even realize that it was propaganda at the time. They thought that everybody knew what they were doing whenever it was really just a farce and a smokescreen, and the rest of the world knew that there was something wrong, but they thought that it was completely the right thing. And it's worrisome. And a lot of people go, oh, but we're not Nazi Germany. Well, how do you know?
Nazi Germany wasn't Nazi Germany before it was Nazi Germany.
Exactly. And I know I actually bring this up a lot with the whole vaccination argument, and I don't want to open that can of worms, to be honest. But people are so hardcore for vaccinations, but I just want people to stop and think that why would you want to give the government that much control over what they put into your body? Anyway.
And you see, that's I do need to wrap the episode up here a bit.
I know.
That is one thing that I always found interesting, was that it's either you're 100% on board with the government completely controlling vaccination, or you have to be completely against it.
Yeah,
like, most of the people I talk to are in favor of vaccination, but they're still not trusting of the government being the one controlling the administration of it. They still want people to be able to make that choice.
Correct.
And I mean, in my eyes, the right choice is to take the vaccination, because that's how herd immunity and a bunch of other parts of the vaccination process work. But at the same time, having the government force it onto people, I can understand the tension that causes, and the questioning of, okay, well, is this actually the way we want this to work?
Right.
But I guess that ties back to that, just kind of being aware of things in the moment and making sure to pay attention to these things, so that you can recognize when these mechanics of social engineering are in play, and then try to recognize how much of it's you actually looking into something,
right,
versus how much of it is you just following the thought that had already been put in your head for you.
Yeah. Well, and this could be a whole nother episode, I swear. But if you look at it, if the government, the CDC guidelines on why do we have to have it that way? Why can't we vaccinate but still do it on our own schedule, which is what I did with my son, and tell them, no, I'm not giving my kid 5 vaccinations today. You can give them 1, and I'll come back in 2 weeks and you can give them another one. Or, just because the government says you're supposed to get this vaccination at 18 months does not mean that you're going to die if you don't. Okay, I'm done.
Well, definitely, though, I was glad to have you on for the episode here. We might even take that away as an episode down the road. So since we're going to wrap everything up here, Jody, again, thank you for coming on the show today. For everyone that's listening, of course, you can follow us on all forms of social media. That includes Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the other ones there. You can go to Being Libertarian. You can go to Rational Standard for South African content. And, of course, my own native Think Liberty. You can also go to my own author page that I do have on Facebook. That's Killian Hobbs-author. You can find me on there, and you can also message directly if you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any ideas for future episodes, or even suggestions for the Bad Arguments series of articles that I do. And of course, as always, if you liked what you heard and you'd like to hear more, I'll see you again next week.